Anyone who ever tried a chaotic life hack that wasn't supposed to work but somehow did, what was it? I was broke, exhausted, and one minor inconvenience away from losing my mind when this happened. I was working 2 jobs, commuting an hour each way, and still somehow overdrafting my bank account every month. The real problem was food. Groceries were expensive, and I kept forgetting lunches at home. Buying takeout near work was basically financial self-harm. One night, half joking, I noticed my company handbook mentioned reasonable access to refreshments during working hours. It was meant to mean coffee and water, but my brain, running on stress and caffeine, latched onto the word reasonable. The next day, I brought a crock pot from home. I didn't ask permission. I just plugged it in under my desk and started cooking soup. No one noticed for hours. By noon, the entire floor smelled like chicken broth and vegetables. People started wandering around confused. Someone asked if the cafeteria was doing a special. I shrugged and said, probably ventilation issues. My manager walked by, sniffed, and kept going. I ate a full hot meal at my desk like a feral office raccoon. Nothing happened. So I escalated. The next week, I upgraded to chili, then rice and beans, then pasta. I learned which recipes cooked quietly and which ones betrayed me with bubbling noises. People began hovering near my desk just to chat. I pretended not to notice when they stared at my food. Eventually, someone asked if I was catering. I laughed and said no. The handbook never said only beverages. It said refreshments. So I printed the page and highlighted it like a lunatic. By month 2, I was meal prepping 5 days a week at work. My grocery bill dropped dramatically. My stress level dropped too. Then coworkers started jokingly asking what was for lunch. I made the mistake of sharing once. That turned into people sampling. That turned into people bringing ingredients. Suddenly, I was running an underground desk kitchen. Someone brought bread. Someone brought cheese. One guy brought spices like he was joining a cult. We ate better than the cafeteria. Morale improved suspiciously fast. Management noticed people lingering near my desk but couldn't figure out why. HR eventually emailed asking about unapproved appliances. I responded with the highlighted handbook page attached. They replied with, "We'll look into it." They never did. For 6 months, I ate like a king. I saved enough money to pay off a credit card. I stopped dreading lunch. I started looking forward to work days in a way that felt illegal. Then one day, a higher-up from corporate visited. Of course it was chili day. He walked in, sniffed, and immediately zeroed in on my desk. He asked what I was doing. I told the truth. I showed him the handbook. He stared at it for a long time. He laughed, actually laughed. Then he said, "Honestly, that's on us." A week later, company policy was updated to specify non-cooked refreshments only. My reign ended quietly, but by then I had savings, and recipes, and a reputation. People still talk about the desk kitchen era. Sometimes new hires ask if it's real. I just smile. It wasn't supposed to work. It absolutely shouldn't have worked. But for a while, I beat capitalism with a crockpot and a highlighter. I was dead broke, underslept, and one bad email away from spiraling when I accidentally discovered the most chaotic life hack of my life. It started during my first year working night shifts at a grocery store that never closed and barely paid. I was so tired that I kept missing my bus, which meant a 40-minute walk home in the dark every morning. One night, while standing outside waiting for the bus that was already late, I noticed the bakery delivery truck idling nearby. The driver was unloading crates and humming like he didn't have a care in the world. I jokingly said, "Man, I'd trade my soul for a ride home." He laughed and said, "Hop in if you don't mind the smell of bread." I thought he was joking. He was not joking. I climbed into the passenger seat, still wearing my store apron, and immediately felt like I was doing something illegal, even though no one said it was. He dropped me off 2 blocks from my apartment and wished me a good morning. I went home confused, grateful, and slightly suspicious. The next night, the bus was late again. The bakery truck was there again. The same driver waved at me like we were old friends. That was when my brain did something dangerous. I started timing my shift end to match his delivery route. I told myself it was temporary. It was not temporary. For 3 months, I got free rides home in a truck full of bread. Sometimes there were muffins, sometimes croissants. Once, a cake that had slid and was declared unsellable. I told no one because saying it out loud felt like it would break the spell. Then things escalated. One morning, the driver called in sick. I panicked. Another driver showed up, saw me waiting, and assumed I was supposed to be there. He gave me a ride too. Apparently, bakery drivers just accept things. I realized no one questioned a tired person holding a clipboard. So I found an old clipboard. I started carrying it everywhere. That clipboard became my passport. With it, I got rides, free coffee refills, and once accidentally walked into a staff-only breakfast meeting. No one asked me to leave. Someone handed me a bagel. At work, my manager noticed I was suddenly always on time and suspiciously well-fed. I blamed meal prep. Then winter hit, and walking outside was brutal. I started riding the bakery truck on weekends too. I learned routes. I learned driver gossip. I learned which bread fell off shelves the most. I was living in a carb-based shadow economy. The hack stopped being about rides and became about survival. I saved enough money on transport and food to pay off a credit card. I slept more. I stopped feeling like I was drowning. Then the universe noticed. One morning, a supervisor from the bakery showed up. He looked at me, then at the driver, then back at me. He asked who I was. My mouth opened, and chaos chose the words. I'm logistics adjacent. He blinked, then nodded. That should have been the end. It wasn't. 2 weeks later, HR emailed my grocery store asking why one of their employees was listed as external transport support in bakery records. I had accidentally been added to a spreadsheet with insurance implications. My manager called me into the office and asked if I had a second job. I said no. She asked why a bakery thought I worked for them. I said I networked incorrectly. There was a meeting. There were crossed arms. No one was mad, just deeply confused. The bakery supervisor admitted they assumed I was a temp. My manager admitted they thought I was just really punctual now. In the end, no one punished me. They just quietly closed the loophole. Drivers were told not to give rides. Clipboards stopped working. My bread economy collapsed overnight. But here's the thing. A month later, the bakery offered me a legit part-time logistics job. Apparently, I had initiative. I accepted. I quit the night shift. I still think about how close I was to being escorted out by security. I also think about how that stupid, accidental, chaotic life hack kept me afloat when nothing else did. Sometimes the worst ideas only work because no one believes someone would actually do them. I was broke in a very specific, humiliating way where you technically still have a job, but your bank account looks like it's buffering. Rent was due, my car was making a noise I can only describe as financial doom, and my boss had just announced mandatory unpaid overtime for team morale. I was tired, petty, and running entirely on iced coffee and spite. That's when I accidentally discovered the dumbest life hack of my entire existence. At my office, we had this absurd rule that said any employee required to stay past scheduled hours must be provided a meal if the shift exceeded 10 hours. It was buried deep in the employee handbook, like a cursed Easter egg no one was supposed to find. The company's workaround was simple. They'd order the cheapest pizza possible and toss it on a table like we were raccoons. But here's the key detail. The rule never specified the quality, quantity, or type of meal. One night, I stayed late by accident because my computer froze during a report submission. I casually emailed HR asking where the provided meal was, just to be annoying. They replied clearly annoyed, telling me to grab something and expense it under the meal policy. I stared at the email like it had just whispered ancient forbidden knowledge into my soul. The next night, I stayed late on purpose. I ordered takeout from a mid-range place nearby. Nothing wild, just a sandwich and fries. It got approved. The third night, I tested the waters I ordered sushi approved. By the end of the week, I realized something terrifying and beautiful. No one was checking, no one cared. The system was automated and the expense category was barely monitored. So I escalated. I started accidentally staying late every night. I ordered real meals. Warm meals, meals with sides, meals that came with bread you didn't have to apologize for. Then I got bold. I ordered enough food for leftovers, then enough food for the next day. Then enough food that my fridge stopped echoing when I opened it. Soon my grocery budget dropped to zero. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I was eating better than I ever had. I justified it morally by telling myself the company owed me. They underpaid us. They overworked us. They sent emails about family culture while denying raises. This was just me balancing the universe. Then one night I made the mistake of inviting a coworker. She stayed late with me and asked where I was ordering from. I shrugged and said, "Company pays." Her eyes widened like I'd just shown her fire. Within a week, 5 of us were doing it. Within a month, the late shift turned into a rotating dinner club. We were coordinating cuisines. We were rating restaurants. Someone brought candles once as a joke, and then it wasn't a joke anymore. Morale skyrocketed, productivity increased, people volunteered to stay late. Management noticed something was wrong immediately. They sent out an email reminding everyone of appropriate meal expenses. We politely ignored it. Then they capped the amount, so we ordered cheaper places but more often. Then they required receipts. We provided them. Then they tried to restrict vendors. We found loopholes. At one point, someone ordered groceries through a delivery app and labeled it meal ingredients. It got approved. That was the beginning of the end. HR called a mandatory meeting. They said the meal policy was being temporarily suspended for review. We all sat there quiet, well-fed, and emotionally fulfilled. 2 weeks later, a revised handbook dropped. The new rules stated meals must be simple, employer-selected, and non-transferable. The magic was dead, but here's the twist. During those 2 months, I saved enough money to fix my car, I paid off a credit card, I stopped living in constant food anxiety, and I realized something important. The hack wasn't just about free meals. It was about realizing how many systems rely on people not pushing back. The company never fired anyone. They couldn't. We followed the rules exactly as written. To this day, whenever I hear someone say, "There's nothing you can do," I think about that period of my life where dinner was reimbursed, joy was abundant, and capitalism briefly blinked. It shouldn't have worked. It absolutely did. I was broke, exhausted, and one missed paycheck away from eating plain rice for a week when this happened. I worked at a big box electronics store where the schedules were written by someone who clearly hated sleep. They'd give you a clopening shift and then act shocked when you looked like a ghost. One night, after closing at 11 p.m., I overheard a supervisor complaining that corporate required minimum staff presence but didn't specify where in the building you had to be. That sentence lodged itself in my brain like a parasite. The next day, half asleep and fueled by spite, I reread the employee handbook out of boredom. There it was, buried in a footnote. Employees must be present on site and available for duty. Nothing about being visible. Nothing about standing. Nothing about not being behind locked doors. Nothing about being awake, technically. That's when the chaotic idea formed. We had a storage room used for seasonal overstock that no one ever entered during slow shifts. It had a badge scanner, a chair, and terrible Wi-Fi. On my next opening shift, I clocked in, did a lap, nodded at the manager, and quietly slipped into the storage room. I brought my radio, logged into the internal chat on my phone, and sat down. For the first hour, nothing happened. I answered one radio call asking where HDMI cables were. I told them aisle 14, which was correct. No one questioned anything. By hour 2, I realized something terrifying. This was working. I started doing it every slow shift. I'd rotate between actually working for an hour, then being present in the storage room. I became absurdly efficient during my visible hours to avoid suspicion. Managers praised me for productivity. Customers thought I was helpful. Meanwhile, I was sitting on a folding chair eating granola bars and listening to podcasts. The loophole expanded. I learned that if you responded to radio calls quickly, people assumed you were nearby. I learned that walking briskly with a clipboard made you invisible. I learned that no one double-checks anything if you sound tired but competent. For 3 months, I effectively turned a 9-hour shift into 4 hours of actual labor. I used the extra time to apply for better jobs on my phone. I paid off a credit card. I started sleeping again. The chaos peaked when another coworker noticed I always just missed them. They joked that I was a cryptid. I leaned into it. I'd say things like, "I'm everywhere today," and disappear. Then corporate announced an audit. Suddenly, managers were everywhere, counting heads, checking rooms. I knew the loopholes days were numbered. On audit day, a regional manager asked where I was. My supervisor said confidently, "On site." Technically correct. They eventually found me in the storage room. There was a long silence. I explained everything calmly, with the handbook open on my phone. No yelling happened, no punishment happened. They just stared at me like I'd broken reality. The policy was updated the next week. "Visible and actively working" was added in bold. I stopped using the hack immediately. But here's the twist. My manager pulled me aside later. She said, "That was messed up." Then she said, "But honestly, impressive." 2 weeks later, she helped me transfer to a better department with fewer hours and higher pay. I quit 6 months after that for a remote job. I still think about that storage room sometimes, about how a tired brain plus bad rules can bend the universe. I didn't plan to become a loophole goblin. I just wanted to survive. And somehow, chaos clocked in for me every day and covered my shift. I was broke in college in the way where you start doing math at the grocery store and putting things back with a straight face. I lived in a dorm that had a meal plan requirement, but I had opted for the cheapest one, which basically covered 2 sad meals a day. By week 3, I realized I was still hungry all the time and also very angry at random objects. One night, while doom scrolling, I saw someone joke that if you look sick enough, dining hall staff won't question you taking extra food. I laughed, but then my stomach growled like it was possessed, and something in my brain snapped. The next day, I didn't shave, wore my oldest hoodie, and walked into the dining hall looking like I had just survived a Victorian-era illness. I shuffled slightly. I sighed dramatically. I kept my eyes half-lidded like I was moments from passing out. The cashier asked if I was okay. I said, "Yeah, just trying to keep food down," and immediately hated myself. She nodded sympathetically and told me to take what I needed. So I took 2 extra sandwiches. Nothing happened. No alarms. No guilt lecture. I went back to my dorm shaking, like I had committed a crime and gotten away with it. The sandwiches tasted better than anything I'd eaten in months. The next day, I tried it again. Same hoodie, same sad shuffle. This time I grabbed fruit, chips, and a muffin for later. Again, no resistance. By the end of the week, I had perfected the act. I learned the difference between flu sick and chronic condition tired. I practiced sighing in the mirror. I even developed a limp that vanished the second I exited the building. Other students started holding the door for me. One girl asked if I needed help carrying my tray. I said yes and felt like the worst person alive while also holding 3 dinners. I started stockpiling food in my mini fridge like a raccoon with a degree plan. Word got around that I was the sick guy. Someone offered me ginger tea. Another person recommended essential oils. At this point, I had accidentally built a support network. The chaotic part was that it kept working, every day, for months. I never asked for special treatment directly, but people just gave it. The dining staff started recognizing me and would say things like, "Make sure you eat, okay?" One worker slipped me a granola bar and winked. I felt like I was living a double life. In class, I was normal. In the dining hall, I was a tragic figure fighting through adversity with a fork. The guilt came and went in waves, but so did the hunger, and the hunger always won. The downfall came during finals week. I walked in during peak hours, exhausted for real this time. I forgot to limp. I grabbed food too confidently. The cashier stared at me and said, "Wow, you're looking a lot better." My soul left my body. I panicked and said, "Yeah, good day." She nodded slowly and rang me up normally. No extras, no sympathy, just vibes. I paid full price and left, heart pounding. The hack was over, but the damage had been done. I had eaten consistently for an entire semester. I gained weight. I could focus in class. I stopped being angry at chairs. To this day, I don't recommend this. It was unethical, chaotic, and fueled by desperation. But somehow, against all odds, pretending to be a sick Victorian orphan saved my GPA.